Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to wait about one more minute before we get started. Okay, welcome. A couple people filing in. That's good. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the 5 Steps to a 5 webinar on the AP Computer Science A. My name is Bob O'Sullivan. I'm the Associate Publisher of Test Prep at McGraw-Hill. And you're looking at about 6 weeks out from test day for AP Comp Science A. So we're going to do our best to make this a valuable session for you. Debbie, if you'll just flip to that first slide, please. A couple housekeeping tips up top before I hand it over to the host. We are welcoming both teachers and students to this session, but just so we're up front, it's primarily a student-focused review here today. So for those of you live and those of you who are viewing the recording, feel free to share. If you're a teacher, share with fellow teachers and your students, share with your friends. But this is basically designed to be a student-focused session to do your best on the AP exam. Please feel free to ask questions during the session. If you'll see, we said we weren't going to be monitoring the chat feature, but in reality, that's not how it goes. What we found in doing a number of these by now is that if you have an important question or something that occurs to you during the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask. Use the chat or the Q&A. It makes it more interactive. And if a question comes up in your head, it'll likely be in someone else's head also. We had a really important question earlier this week about the test time, and we actually had discovered something. So please do feel free to ask questions as we go on. If you get in there and someone else has already asked your question, just click the thumbs up icon. That way we know it's important. Participants will not be able to see one another. You should be able to see me and Debbie Clip, our host, and you'll be able to hear a couple of people on the McGraw-Hill side, but no one should be able to see one another. So that's okay. And importantly for teachers and for students, no student data is being collected here today. If you've signed up here, there's no risk at getting on a mailing list or any things like that. We are not collecting any data at all. Before we get started, the second to last bullet there, it is designed to be an interactive session. As we go through, you'll see that there's a number of questions we'll ask and some polling on a multiple choice questions as we go through. Please do participate in those. Even if you don't know the answer, guess. It makes it a lot more fun. It makes it a lot more interactive for all of us. So please do feel free to participate as we go through. And last but not least, the session is being recorded. Again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, put the word out there. Teachers, invite your fellow faculty, students, put the word out to other students. It's going to be a valuable tool. That URL there at the bottom with like a bit.ly, we'll give you a couple seconds to take a picture of that with your phone or jot it down if you're going old school. We'll show it again at the end, but it's important. You could throw that out there to the universe. Anyone that's preparing for AP Comp Science A, this recording will be available by tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to your host, Debbie Clip. Debbie is the author of our AP Computer Science A 5 Steps. Debbie, over to you. You're muted.
Just saw that. Got a big little notice says you are muted. Yeah, so So our agenda for today, or whenever you're watching this recording, is to talk about the AP Computer Science A exam. I'm going to go through some questions that are in the 5 Steps book, and I'm going to give you some advice that I have gathered from being a reader, as well as from the chief reader of the Computer Science A exam. Give you some essential topics that you need to review. Take a look at some practice problems that are in the book. And if you don't have the book with you, I'm going to be showing you the questions. They'll be on the screen anyway. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. But again, if you have some questions as we're going through this, feel free to put them in that QA. All right, so I've been a AP Computer Science A teacher since a long time ago, before many of you were born. I won't say what the year is, but it's been a while. Since I was a teacher, I've gone to conferences and workshops, and I applied to be a computer science reader. That is one of the actual humans that grades the free response questions of the AP exam. I've been initially a reader, and then I was promoted to be a table leader, and then most recently a question leader, which means I help to train all of the readers on one particular question. And when you do the reading in our particular subject, you basically just read one question the entire time. From that, ETS has asked me to be an item writer. So I've written some multiple choice questions for both the AP exam as well as the computer science praxis exam that the teachers take. I've also been invited to be a computer science A consultant, which means I now do workshops for teachers in either day workshops, online workshops, or summer institutes. And I've presented at several conferences topics related to AP Computer Science A.
Debbie, are
So
you
that's
planning to
my
go to the
experience.
AP conference this summer?
I'm sorry?
The AP
No,
conference?
it conflicts with one of my AP Summer Institutes
All right.
because it's on a weekend. It starts on a Thursday. So I'd like to be able to go.
Next year.
So computer science. So when I first started teaching the course started in 1984, and that language was Pascal. And then in 1999, the language changed to C++. And then in 2004, the language on the exam changed to Java. And so it's constantly changing, making sure that it's relevant to what the colleges are doing as their first course. That's not to say that all the colleges' introductory course is in Java, but the majority of colleges have their introductory course in Java, and it's going to be in Java for the foreseeable future. If they do change it to a different language, then we'll have several years to make that change ourselves as teachers, whereas you, the students, you're unaffected by it. But through it all, no matter what the language of choice has been, the goals have remained the same, and that is to teach computer science, not just programming. We just happen to use the language of Java as our vehicle at the moment. And of course, we want to maximize the likelihood that students will get AP credit for doing well on their exam. So these are some notes that hopefully will help you as a student when you're taking the exam. I'm going to go through some free response questions and multiple choice questions and give you some tips that hopefully your teacher has also shared with you, because they're very targeted towards some of the things that have been going on throughout the years with the exams. These are the common mistakes that the students make, and these are some of the things that are very easy to correct. I'm also going to give you some study recommendations 4 weeks before the exam, 2 weeks before the exam, and then the night before or the day of the exam. All right, first things first is the exam. I'm sure you're aware that the exam is in 2 parts. The first part that you will take is multiple choice. You will have 40, every subject is different. Computer Science A happens to have 40 multiple choice questions. The questions have answer choices A, B, C, D, E. You will have 90 minutes, an hour and a half, to answer those 40 questions. Each question is equally weighted, so you get a point if you get it correct, and you don't get any points if you do not get it correct. Half of your exam score will be based on the multiple choice part. Then you'll take a short little 10-15 minute break, and then you'll take the 4 free response questions. Those 4 free response questions are also going to be 90 minutes in length. Each of the questions will be based on 9 points. Most of the questions have a part A, a part B, some even have a part C, and the other part of your grade, the 50% is based on the free response. So half from the multiple choice, half from the free response. The grading of the exam changes from year to year in terms of what exact number of points you need. So the last example that that has been released by ETS is the 2015 exam score range. In that particular year, out of the 80 total points, if a student earned between 62 and 80, they got a 5. If they earned between 44 and 61, they got a 4. If they got 31 to 43, they earned a 3. So all told, that particular year, 64% of the students got a 3 or above. Most recently, last year, in 2022, 67.5% of the students got a 3 or above. So it's not based on the specific, it changes from year to year how many points as well as the percentages. If you take a look at the total points in this particular year, 2015, out of the 80 points, if a student earns 31 points total between the multiple choice and the free response, all that is about 38.75% of the points. So if you earn at least 50% of the points between multiple choice and free response, you're going to get at least a 3. So it's a pretty nice goal to have. This is the scores of all AP. If you have a 5, that means to colleges, you're extremely well qualified. If you score a 4, you're well qualified. A 3 is qualified. So those are the 3 scores that colleges should give you credit. But it all depends on what college you're going to, as well as what is going to be your major. You can go on, there's different websites that you can go on to look to see what your particular college of choice, what score they accept. But that shouldn't matter what score they accept. You're going to be prepared for the exam by doing all of this curriculum and doing it well. All right, so what I want to take a look at is, as I said, there's 4 free response questions on the exam. I want to take a look at question 1. One of the questions that's in the diagnostic exam, question number 1, which is an example of the free response question 2 type, which is a class design. And then I want to take a look at the diagnostic exam question number 2, which is similar to a free response question number 4, which is a 2D array. So here is question number 1 in the diagnostic exam, which is similar to free response question number 2, which is class design. So here, this is the example. So in math, the complex number is a number that is composed of both a real component and an imaginary component. Complex numbers can be expressed in the form a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers and I is the imaginary number, which is the square root of 1. In complex expressions, a is considered the real part, b is considered the imaginary part. Addition with complex numbers involves adding the real parts and the imaginary parts as 2 separate sums and expressing the answer as a new complex number. So assume that the following code segment appears in a class other than complex number. The code segment shows an example of using the complex number class to represent 2 complex numbers and find their sum. So here you can see the code. Complex number x1 is a new complex number with 3.16.4. Complex number y2 is a complex number. Z1 is a new complex number. And then we're being asked to add them together, x1 and x2, and then print out the result. And then we're doing that same thing again with two different complex numbers, x2, y2, adding them together and printing out the result. So it is your task to write the complete complex number class. Your implementation must include a constructor that has two double parameters that represent A and B in that order, and a default constructor. It must also include a method called add that calculates and returns the sum of two complex numbers represented by the two parameters, and a toString method that will return a string representing the complex number in the form A plus BI. Your class must produce the indicated results when invoked by the code segment given above. Now, if this was the real AP exam, there's 4 questions, you have 90 minutes. So if you divide all that time equally, you have about 22.5 minutes to read the problem, come up with a solution to the problem, plan it out, write it down, and then take a look at it. So what I'm going to do right now is give you 10 minutes to read this over yourself and write the complex number class. And then we'll talk about some tips, some helpful hints to get you solving the problem correctly and hopefully earning the full 9 points. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes.
Debbie, we've got a question. Do we write it in blue or Blue Jay or paper? Can you hear me? Do you know the answer to that?
I just needed to find the mute button. You're writing it on paper. The computer science exam is everything is written on paper.
Thank you, Debbie. Another question came in, Debbie. Everything is on paper. There's no way to compile code. What if a student makes a small mistake, like forgetting a semicolon?
We'll talk about some of those things in a little bit.
Nice. Get into it. Thank you for your question, Manny. If we don't get, if you want to come back, Manny, later and ask, if we didn't specifically ask what it is you're looking for, feel free to come back.
So that's been 5 minutes. So you have 5 minutes left. Hopefully you're writing the class, the code successfully.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's 1 more minute left. All right, that was a very long 10 minutes to just sit here waiting So hopefully you, the students, were writing the code. Please understand, 90 minutes for 4 questions divided equally, that's 22 and a half minutes. I only gave you 10 minutes. So if you didn't finish writing the code, don't worry about it right now, because for the real exam, you'd have twice as much time. But for the brevity of this webinar, I just wanted to give you some time to take a look at it before we discussed it. So hopefully that was enough time to get a good start of the question and possibly even finish it. Now, when you take the exam, when you go in during exam day, and I'll bring this up in a little bit, but it was asked before, you only need to bring in a pencil, a pen, and your ID. And depending on maybe some other things, depending on your school, what their rules are. The computer science exam, obviously you need a pencil because it's multiple choice. You need to fill out all of those lovely little circles. So you need to do that with a number 2 pencil. But for the free response, computer science exam wants you to do it with a pencil, so you can write and you can make your erasures. That doesn't mean that if you bring a pen, because you will need to use a pen, I think, to do some initial, filling out some of your demographics. That doesn't mean that if you use a pen for the computer science exam, that it won't be graded. It absolutely will be graded. We're just asking you to write a pencil because of making erasures and things like that. And while I'm talking about the erasures, if you do write your code, and again, I'll bring this up in a little bit, if you do write code and you want to change your mind, instead of taking the time to do like a whole chunk of code you want to just get rid of, instead of just erasing all of that code, it's preferred to just put a big X through it or scribble it out, because number 1, it's going to take you some time to erase, and you don't want to waste any time erasing. And number 2, you don't want to erase because your piece of paper is going to get scanned into a computer. And when you erase and you write over top of it, that computer, when it scans it, you sometimes see the writing that was left behind, and that makes it very difficult to read. So please cross it out. If you have some code, just cross it out, scribble it out, whatever, and just continue the code later on. Don't erase. But of course, if you erase, it's okay, but we would just prefer, it's for your benefit if you erase. Do not erase, sorry. All right, getting back to this question. So here, question number 2 on the free response will always be a class design question. So you're going to have a blank piece of paper and you're going to have to design the class from start to finish. So if you take a look at the directions at the bottom, you're going to have your pencil. What I would suggest is circling some things that stand out to you. What do you see is important? Number 1 is asking you to write a complex number class. So you're writing a complete class and it must be named complex number. Capital COMPLEX, capital NUMBER. Your implementation must include a constructor. So don't forget to write a constructor. That constructor has 2 parameters that are doubles. You have to do a default constructor. You have to do a method called add. You have to have that add have 2 parameters, and you have to have a 2-string method. So if you take a look at what you're being asked down here at the bottom, it matches what you see up here, because right here we have a constructor with 2 double parameters, a constructor with 2 double parameters, a constructor with no parameters, that's the default constructor. And then we have a method right here called add, which is taking 2 parameters. And what are their types? Their types are complex number. And what else am I doing? I'm also printing, and that's the 2-string method. So take a look at what you're asked, right? You don't have a highlighter, but you do in class while you're practicing for the exam. But during the exam, take your pencil and just circle some of these important parts and take a look at this code that you're asked to. This is code that should work based on what you have written. So
Debbie,
here
we hit the
is
30-minute mark. So just as a time check, we're a third of the way there.
okay. So here is the solution that I've supplied in this in the book. There's more than one solution. This is just one common solution. Same thing happens for the AP reading. The scorers are given a canonical solution, which is probably the most common solution that students will write down, but that doesn't mean that's the only solution. You know that there's many different ways that problems can be solved. So here, this is the solution that I have in the book. So here is my heading, public class complex number. I have two double variables called real and imaginary that are private. These are my instance variables. I have a constructor that has two parameters. I'm calling it A, which is going to be a double, calling it B, which also is going to be a double. And I'm going to take the values of those parameters and put it into my instance variables called real and imaginary. And then I have my default constructor, which takes no parameters, which means I, as the designer of the class, have to come up with values myself, as opposed to these parameters right here, A and B. And so I'm going to initialize them at 0 and 0. And
Debbie,
then
we got a quick question. Maria is asking, why won't we include accessor and mutator methods?
You can. That's a very good question. You can absolutely include those if you'd like. This particular question didn't need it. And to be honest with you, the 2022 version of the 5 Steps book, that's exactly what I did. I had accessor and mutator. I had accessor methods to get the real part and get the imaginary part. But in the writing of the 2023, I took it out. So you can absolutely put them in there. Good question. Very good question. That's why I'm talking about there is not just one solution. The readers are experienced teachers. They're either teaching the AP course in high school or they're teaching the CS1 course in college. So they know they know Java very well. So if you write a different variation of this, it's not going to throw them for a loop. All right, then I have my method called add, which is going to take two complex numbers, A and B. And I'm going to take the real part and add them together. And I'm going to take the imaginary part, add them together. And I'm going to create a new complex number based on those two pieces, the real part and the imaginary part. And then I have my toString method, which will print out the parentheses, the plus, the value of the A, the value of the B, and the I. And so what's not most important right here is the solution to this. What the purpose of this is for me to give you some insights into how the exam is graded and to make sure that you include all the things that the readers are looking for, all the things that are important to this particular question. So as you know, as I've said before, question number 2 on the free response will always be a class design question. So these are the things that are always looked for and will earn you points, earn you one of the 9 points. So the most common errors is not doing some of these things correctly. So I want to make sure that you do these things correctly. It's very simple. When you do a class header, make sure you make the class public, use the keyword class, and then the name of the class. Now this particular class, they wanted us to call it complex number. So you want to make sure that you call it complex number. Now that doesn't mean you're going to get penalized if you use lowercase letters or uppercase letters in the wrong positions. The readers will disregard that, but do your best to do it the way that it was written in the design. So you want to make sure you say public class, the name of the class, which happens to be complex number. Or sometimes the questions for the free response for the class design question asks you to extend, write a subclass of something that is already there. So make sure you include the words extends and then whatever that name is. Okay, so the class header, that's always going to be, in most cases, it's going to be a point. And you should know that the word public is optional. You can start it by saying class complex number because by default, everything will be public. So you can leave that out, but it's best to put it in there. But please do not call it private, because if you say private class, because it's private, it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to use it. So you don't want to declare it as private.
Debbie, we got
Whereas on
another
the other
question.
hand,
Sorry, did I
it's okay.
interrupt you? Do you want to finish that thought?
No, it's okay. I'm trying to look for where the chat is. I keep losing and I
We've
click.
got a question that from Antonio, which asks, will we get docked points if we choose shorter and almost nonsensical variable names? Writing B versus imaginary.
No, you will not. You will not get penalized for doing that. No, you will not. But don't do it just to be smart, a smarty pants. No, you will not. The instance variables are the variables that are used throughout the class, and you want to make sure that you declare them private. So if you do not declare your instance variables as private, you will absolutely not earn a point. Out of the 9 points, you're not going to get that point for the instance variables. So make sure they are private. Make sure you say the type. Here I said private double, or it might be private int, private string, private array list, whatever it happens to be. And then whatever the name of the variable is, whatever you decide to call it, you can call it whatever you want. You know, try to choose something that is logical and makes sense, because that is easy to follow. The constructor for the class design. Only do a constructor if you're asked to do a constructor. So this particular question, if you go back and look at what I asked, I did ask you to write not only the one constructor, but also the default constructor. Make sure that when you do that constructor, that you use the name of the class, whatever your class was. In this case, it's complex number. Here, the constructor is complex number, public complex number, the 2 parameters or the no parameters, but make sure you declare that to be public. Now, again, you can leave off the word public and you will not be penalized, but do not make it private. And remember, the job of the constructor is to take those instance variables and give them values, whether the values are values that you make up, the zeros in this case, or the values of the parameters that were passed, which is more likely. The class design question will most always ask for a method to be written. So make sure that you have the correct header. You say, again, public. You can leave it off, but just don't do a private unless it's a helper method that you're writing yourself. So the method header would be public. Make sure you call the method what you were asked to call it. In this particular case, we were asked to call it add. Make sure you call it add. Do not call it anything different. You're not going to get credit, because the readers are going to look specifically for a method called add. Now, if you call it adds with an S, that's an excused error, but don't call it anything else. Don't push your luck, right? Also make sure that your method that you're writing, that you were asked to write, has not only the correct number of parameters, but the right types. So in this case, the example had 2 parameters, and both of those parameters were of the complex number class type. So make sure you have the right number and the right types. The methods are likely to be public, not private, unless you're doing a private helper method yourself. Return. Make sure when you have a method that it's either going to return some type, an int, a boolean, a string, an array, array list, or something. Make sure that you put that return type between public and the name of the method, and that somewhere inside of the method, writing of the method, that you declare a variable to hold the value of that return type. And most importantly, that you return that value. Now, the difference is the return. Make sure you include a return for a non-void method. So both of these methods that I had to write, add, needed to return something. So in this case, it was a complex number. In this case, it was a string. But sometimes methods don't return anything. And in that case, we would write this as being public void. And when that's the case, do not have a return inside of your method at all. Don't say return done or return finished or return true. You will absolutely get penalized for doing that. So only use a return if the method requires it. If you have a local variable, make sure you declare it inside the method where they're needed. So right here, in order for me to add the real parts and the imaginary parts, I chose myself to declare two temporary local variables, real part and imaginary part. And in doing so, I had to declare its type as a double. The two-string method, again, is very rare. I think there's only been one time through all the years where you've needed to write a two-string method in your class, but this particular question that was written really lent itself to have a two-string method. Parameters. If there are parameters that are required, like I said before, make sure you match how many there are as well as the types. So public, return type, whatever the name of the method is, and then whatever your variables happen to be, your parameters, whatever the name is as well as the return type. And as a good rule of thumb, only write the methods that you are asked to write. If you happen to write extra methods on your piece of paper and those methods aren't called, then we as readers will not look at them at all. The only time we will look at a method that is on your paper that was not asked is if you created a method yourself and you wanted to call it, like that private helper method that I referred to, right? If you want to have a private helper method, we, the readers, are going to look at that because you in your code somewhere have called it. So don't add anything extra because we're not going to look at it if it's not called. And so you've just taken time that you don't really need to take. So that's my helpful hints for free response question number 2, the class design.
Debbie, real quick, I missed this one earlier. I know you talked about it, pencil and pen on the exam, but we did get a clarifying question. Are we allowed to use pencil on the exam, or do you have to use pen?
No,
So can you
the
just
pencil
clarify
all
that?
the way through pencil.
Pencil all the way through.
Multiple choice, obviously, because you're going to be bubbling. And then the free response, the computer science A exam, as well as some of the other math exams, ask you to use a pencil. But like I said, if you happen to use a pen, you will still get graded.
Right.
Okay. And so here I've just highlighted some of the important things that I wanted to talk about. Okay. We don't have time to go through this particular question, but I want to take a look at it and give you some pointers. This is question number 2 in the diagnostic exam in the book. It's about a coin collector. So here is a public class coin. Here I have private instance variables. I have a constructor taking 3 values, taking those parameters and initializing those instance variables to those parameters. And then I have, like someone had asked a little bit ago, my accessor methods, get country, get year, get coin type. So this is a class. And so they're going through some explanation about a coin club. And then here is a coin collection tools class, another class, which has in it a private instance variable called coin box, which is a 2-dimensional array full of coin, which is the class we're talking about here. And then it goes through and talks about the constructor. This is what you're going to do in part A. It talks about the method. This is what you're going to do in part B, and this is what you're going to do in part C. So this is a very common setup of how they have questions 1, 3, and 4. Here's a class that I'm defining, and then here's another class that uses it. Now let's write these methods in part A, part B, and part C. And this particular one is a 2D. And I don't have time to write this question, to answer this question, but if you have the book, you can do so, or you can take a look at the recording and pause it and take a look back at it. But here, what I wanted to highlight is the instance variable called coin box. So when you have an instance variable, what that is saying to you, again, make a big circle around it. Throughout the writing of the solution for part A, for part B, part C, you are most likely going to use this instance variable coin box throughout. So the only variables you have at your disposal right now are coin box and the ones that are in the constructor headers. So I'll get to that on the next page. So here is part A. They give an explanation, but what's important here is they will give you, and this is for questions 1, 3, and 4, they will give you the method header. And when they give you the method header, what they're also giving you is these are the names of the parameters, country, rows, columns, that when I write my solution for part A, I'm going to use these variable names, country, rows, and columns, and most likely that private instance variable. For part B, I'm passed as a parameter an array list called my coins. So when I write my solution part B, all throughout the solution, I'm going to be referring to this variable right here, my coins. Same thing for part C. Well, part C, it doesn't have any parameters. So anything that you use in this method, you're going to have to declare yourself. All right, so here's the solution for part A and for part B. So here's some tips. This is why I wanted to choose this particular question, is some of the things I just mentioned. The variable usage, the private instance variables from the class declaration. Remember up above, the private instance variable that I had highlighted was called coin box. So therefore, throughout my solution for part A, B, and C, I'm probably going to use coin box. Now, if you remember, all I did was declare coin box to be a two-dimensional array. In order for me to use it, I have to instantiate it. And that's what's going to be done as the first step in my constructor. I'm going to take coin box, the two-dimensional array that I declared, to be a new coin with the parameter of rows and columns. Make sure you use rows and columns as your parameters. Yes, if you leave off the S, we'll excuse that, but you want to make sure that you use the proper names. And then because it's a two-dimensional array, we're going to have a nested loop to go through and initialize everything to that particular country, which comes from the parameter, and then 0, 0. So as a tip, private instance variables from the class declaration, make sure you use those. Make sure you use the parameters from the method header, right? See how country, rows, and columns was used. And here's part B, my coins. See how my coins is used throughout. Instantiation, because it was declared, I need to make sure I instantiate it. And then traversal, because this is a 2D array, I'm going to have a traversal, and in most cases, it's going to be nested loops. So just in general, this particular, it didn't make a difference how it was traversed because everything was set to 0, 0, and whatever the country is. But as a tip, so question number 4 on the free response will be a 2D array question. Make sure you know how to traverse a 2D array in row major order, meaning you go across the first row, second row, third row, fourth row, or you might have to go by columns, down the first column, down the second column, down the third column. Make sure you know how to write a nested loop to handle that. This, what you see here is row major order, whereas if I reversed it, it would be column major order. There's also something known as, and I didn't hear this term until 2 years ago with the question I was grading, a serpentine pattern. I knew about the pattern, I just didn't know a name of it, but I like the name serpentine, like a snake. You're winding back and forth. So you go across the first row from left to right, and then you go in the second row from right to left, and then left to right, right to left. You're going back and forth, back and forth. Likewise, if you can go up or down. And then also know how to traverse the diagonals of a square 2D array. So these are some tips about 2D arrays because you will see it as question number 4. And then here's the solution for part C. Again, the instantiation, This particular method has a it has an array list that is being returned. So you need to make sure that you declare an array list, instantiate the array list, do some manipulation, and then go ahead and return it. So the method does have a return type. So if it does, you'll need to declare and initialize a local variable to temporarily keep track and make sure that you return. And in most cases, that return is the very last statement. All right, so some other things about free response. These are things that you don't want to do because you will get a 1-point penalty out of 9. So each question is graded separately. You've got 4 questions. Each question is graded separately. So if you do this mistake on all 4 questions, you're going to get lots of points taken off. So don't do that. So these are definite point penalties. Your confusion between array and array list. So when you have an array, you have to use the square brackets. When you have array list, you have to use the methods, the get, the set, the add, etc. If you confuse the two, so if you have an array and you want to, if you're given an array and you use the set method, you're going to get a 1-point penalty total for the question. If you do it multiple times, right? If you do it once, you're going to do it 5 different times in that same response. If you do it multiple times, you're only going to get penalized once for that question. So just make sure you keep track of whether you're using an array, square brackets, or the array list methods, the get, the set, etc. Another common penalty is extra code that causes a side effect, such as printing. So if you do a system.out.print and you were not asked to print something, you will absolutely get a penalty. So do not write on your paper system.out.print. If you do write it on your paper, go back, read the question, and make sure you were asked to write something. And even then, go back again and read it, because only one time in all of the years, the free response question had a print question, had the need to do a system.out.print. So just make sure. So print statements, extra code that causes a side effect. Like I said before, if you write a method in your class declaration and it's not used at all, that's not a penalty. What will be a penalty is if you put something in your class declaration or any of the other things that cause something bad to happen, like you destroyed your array or something like that. Another point penalty is that you have a lot of local variables. You declared these temporary variables for your methods, but you never said that they were a double or an int or a string or an array list or something. So nowhere on your paper did you say any of those words. You will absolutely get a point penalty. Now, if you have 5 different variables that you've declared in your code and you forgot one, you're not going to get penalized. Or if you forgot 2 of them, you're not going to get penalized. You're only going to get penalized if you never declared any of them to be the int, the double, the string, etc. Nowhere on your paper. Again, that's in that one particular question. So if it's something that you never do, you're going to get penalized for it in questions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Destruction of persistent data, that would be if you have the parameter that is passed and you make changes to it. If it's an array list or an array, you're definitely going to get a penalty there. And the last error for getting a point penalty is if you have a void method that returns something. And if you have a void method and you put a return in there, you're definitely going to get a penalty. If you have a constructor that's going to return a value, you're definitely going to get a penalty. So just take a look at these and make sure that your code that you write does not have any of these. All right, so here is the exam schedule. Computer science is Wednesday, the first week, May 3rd in the afternoon. Your school should schedule it at 12 o'clock or 12:30, 11:30, somewhere around that afternoon time. If you happen to be taking comparative government and politics as an AP course, you obviously cannot take 2 exams at one time. So your testing coordinator will have to have you take the alternate exam to one of these subjects. So this gives you 6 weeks until the exam is being given. So you have time. All right, recommendations. So 4 weeks before the exam. So in the 5 steps book, there is a full practice exam 1 and 2. So what you should do is take both of those exams. They have 40 multiple choice questions. They have 4 free response questions. Take a look at them and answer the questions. You know, give yourself 3 hours or 3¼ hours to take the test. The solutions are worked out to both the multiple choice and the free response, so you can take a look at those and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. 2 weeks before the exam, do some last minute reviewing. Take a look at some of those topics that you were weak at and see if you can boost up your strength, as well as the things that you were strong at. Make sure you are still strong. If you're good at doing the class design questions, then make sure that you do lots of practice with that so that you know that you'll get the full 9 points. It is on paper and pencil. You're not going to be using a computer, so please practice legible writing. I know I'm very, if you take a look at my notes that I have written around for different things, they're a little sloppy because they're only for me, but you want to make sure that you write as legibly as possible, because human readers, I'm going to be reading your question. Someone else is going to be reading your question and grading it. So it makes it a lot easier for our eyes and for our understanding if you write legibly. So please practice writing legibly. You will be given a quick reference to use for the multiple choice as well as a free response. So hopefully your teacher has shared this with you. If not, you can find it online as well as in the book. You'll be given, it'll be in the booklet for the multiple choice, probably either at the beginning, one of the beginning pages or the end pages. Make sure you're familiar with it because it tells you all the different methods that you should know for the string class, the integer class, the double class, the math class, the array list class, and the object class. As well as when you take the free response, it will also be in that booklet, either as the first page or the last page, and you have it to use. You cannot bring this in with you. The only thing that you can bring in with you the day of the exam is a pencil and your ID, and maybe a watch so that you can see the time and know how much time you have. And of course, like taking any test the night before, just get a good night's sleep and relax. All right, we have about 30 minutes left. So I'm going to go through these a little bit faster than what I had wanted. So here are some strategies that are in chapter 4 of the book, pages 59 to 63. And just like with any test that you're going to take, on the day of the exam, you want to make sure that you have a good, breakfast or good lunch, eat a good lunch, don't go in hungry or whatever your normal routine is, just stick with that same routine. You will have a few minutes between the multiple choice and the free response to have a bathroom break or something, depending on your school. If you have a little snack, have a drink, whatever. Make sure you bring with you, as I said, the pencil, the pen, a photo ID, and a watch. You may not bring anything else into the test. No, it's not on the computer. You can't bring a calculator. You can't bring any scrap material, any reference paper, nothing, nothing, nothing. The multiple choice, since you will not have any scrap paper, use the extra space in the booklet to write whatever you need to write. Trace your code, jot down some ideas, just write all over the book, okay? Trace it so you don't make a mental mistake, because you have choice A, B, C, D, E. A good test designer, if the answer is B, they're going to have really good distractors for A, C, D, and E, some common mistakes. And sometimes if you just do it in your head, you're going to make some mental mistakes. So if you can, use the book and write down as much as you can. Eliminate answer choices. You don't have any penalty for guessing. Make sure you answer every single question, and you have about 2 minutes, right? 90 questions, 90 minutes, you have 40 questions. That's a little over 2 minutes per question. Now, some questions are going to be, you'll be able to answer quicker than others, but about 2 minutes per question. And of course, use this Java quick reference as you need it. It's in your multiple choice book somewhere, either the first page or the last page. It's in there. Free response, you're going to be given just a blank piece of paper, a booklet, which has a blank piece of paper which looks exactly like this or very similar to this. It says at the top, this is important, trust me, completely fill in the circle that corresponds to the question. So if you're answering question number 1, make sure you bubble question 1. If you're answering question 2, make sure you bubble at the top of that paper question number 2. Only answer one question per page, meaning question 1, you might need 4 pieces of paper. So at the top of the first page, put question 1. Next page, question 1. Next page, question 1. Next page, question 1. But do not do 2 questions. You cannot answer questions 1 and 2 on the same piece of paper because you can only bubble one number. So please make sure you do that, because again, this is all going to be scanned into the computer. And as a reader, I'm going to be grading, let's say question number 1, I'm going to get all of the pieces of paper that have question 1 bubbled. So if you don't bubble question 1, I can't grade it. Now, of course, there's backup plans to all of that. So if you don't do that, it'll still work out, but let's make it easy and bubble the right thing. You can put, so question 1 will probably have a part A, B, C. You can fit, if you'd like, question 1, part A, part B, part C, all on one page. You don't have to separate, put on this page 1A, the next page 1B. No, you don't have to do that. Whatever is convenient for you. Again, write neatly. You've got about 22 minutes. Make sure you pay attention to the variable names that are in the header, the instance variables, use them throughout. So all of these things I've said, if the method is a void, don't use a return. If the method has a return, make sure you have a local variable declared, initialized, modified, and returned. If you revise your answer, cross it out. Don't waste time erasing. Don't write any comments in your code. Don't take the time to do that. The readers are not going to read them. Well, we'll read them. We just won't use them to grade anything. Use the quick reference, and credit is awarded for every part of the code that is done correctly. All right, so these are the 10 units that are in the book. These are the 10 units that are covered in the AP Computer Science exam. This is the weighting of the multiple choice. This is the free response. So just recently, as of 2019, College Board has told us that question number 1 will be based on units 1 through 4. So in question number 1, you don't need to use an array. You don't use an array list. You don't a 2D array, no recursion, nothing. Nice and simple, just conditionals and iteration. Question number 2, the free response will be the writing of the class. It might be just a class, or it might be using inheritance. Question 3 is going to be an array or an array list. It might be a combination of the two, or it just might be one of them. And then question number 4 is about a 2D array. So these are guaranteed to be the types of questions. So make sure you know how to do all of that manipulation. Whereas the multiple choice, it's kind of scattered all throughout of the mixture of, each of the different units. All right, so what I've done, talked a lot for one. I've selected a couple of questions throughout the book in each of the units that are similar to what you might see on the AP exam. And I've chosen specifically the diagnostic exam from the example that I did before, as well as the multiple choice questions here, because I want you to use the diagnostic exam for what it's used for and what its name says, and that is to see how you're doing and diagnose your problems. Whereas when you're ready to take the real exam, that's what the practice exams, that's what the practice exam 1 and 2 are for at the very end. So these are from the diagnostic, because I didn't want to ruin some of this for you. So now it's going to be your turn to participate. Sorry that I've talked so long, but hopefully you've gotten some good tips on answering the free response questions. So here's some tips for the multiple choice. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer this.
Those of you attending live, you can click and drag the poll over to the side if it's blocking the question. Can you see the results?
Mhm.
Okay, you can.
Okay. So again, you've got 90 minutes to answer 40 questions. So if it was the real exam, you've got about 2 minutes, and I only gave you 1 minute. So if you're watching this on a recording, stop it, stop the recording, answer the question. When you're ready to see what the answer is, then play the recording again. That way you'll be able to, have enough time to do it so you can fully do it. So the answer for this question, so you have the quick reference, and one of the methods on the quick reference is in the math class, right? Math.random. And here random returns a double greater than or equal to 0 and less than 1. So it's 0.0 all the way up to 0.99999. So make sure you're familiar with that. So the answer here was D. And so we got about half of you. So we had half of you answer that question correctly. So congratulate yourselves there. So this is a common question that is asked. You need to be familiar with random. Sometimes it will appear in the free response questions. Sometimes it'll appear in the multiple choice questions. So you have to be familiar with how random works. And here it says it returns, but by doing this times 21, what that is telling me is I'm going to get 21 different values between 0 and something, and then I'm going to add 13 to it. So that right there tells me that the smallest number I'm going to get is 13, and the largest number is 33, because that includes 21 numbers. So take a look and practice at some of the random, because you're probably going to see it as a multiple choice or a free response. It seems to always come up. All right, the next question is a Boolean expression in an if statement. It is found in the diagnostic exam, page 24. It's question number 2. So I will give you a minute. Okay. Again, if you're watching the recording and you haven't finished the question, pause it and don't start it until you're ready. So the answer for this one is E. The majority of you got choice E. So here, what this is doing, so the point of this, what this question is testing is the conditional statements, right? Do you know how the if, else if works, as well as do you know about the Boolean operators of and? In this particular case, that's all there, but you also have to know the or and the not. So the purpose of this question is you need to know the flow of the if statements, the nested if statements, understand the Boolean operators, the not, and, or, and their order of operations. So I talk about the order of operations in the book on page 122. Make sure you're familiar with De Morgan's laws, page 121, and make sure you know about short circuit evaluation. And so that's what all of this is testing in terms of the conditionals. So that's what they're looking for, is are you familiar with these different elements? All right, question number 3. Or the next question is from Unit 4. I'm not going to give you time to do this one because there's I want to get through some other ones. I'm running out of time here, but this is something that is common. Here is a chunk of code. This is number 17 in the book. The chunk of code. Here is another code segment 1. Here's a code segment 2 and 3. So they frequently ask questions of this type. Which of the code segments produce the same output as the original? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? 2 and 3? 1, 2 and 3? So they have a lot of those types of questions. So if you can eliminate, like if 1 doesn't work, then you know it's not A and it's not E. or if 2 doesn't work, then you know it's not B or it's not D. So that's where you want to eliminate some of those questions, some of those choices, so that you can narrow it down. So this one, again, is just looking, this is from Unit 4 iteration. Just, do you know the differences between the different types of iterations? The answer was B. Most iterations that you see that you've probably worked with yourself, you start them at 0, right? And you go up by 1, but make sure that you're familiar with iterations that start at something different than 0, or that either go up by something different than +1 or down by something different than -1, because you have to, they're not as common when you're programming yourself, but they are something that you should be familiar with. So have some practice with different types of loops that start and stop at something other than 0 and increment or decrement by 1.
Debbie, I just want to say that the question before this, which one was that? Because I want to loop back to it at the end. We did get a question on it. I don't want to hold you up. This is Unit 3. Okay. Thanks.
So look at the boundaries, because again, the difference between answer choice A, B, C, D, E might be just a difference of the equals, or less than or equal. Here's less than, this is less than or equal to. So be very careful about that. All right, Unit 5, writing classes. So based on what we just did earlier, I feel confident that we can talk through this one real quick. So I'm going to give you 45 seconds just so we can get through. Good job. Whoop. Only one person answered that. Where is everybody? So the answer is C. So this one you have to be careful. So here is a class. I've got my private instance variables. I have my constructor. I have my accessors. The get name has playground, get acres. So here I'm doing instantiating a new object called park. Not very good that it has one is a capital P, others a lower p, but that's besides the point. A is going to compile with an error because park, which is the name of your object, .acres, you're trying to access a private instance variable and you cannot do that. So A is not correct because it's a private. You cannot do that. B does not work because central is not the name of the object. The object's name is park. So B doesn't work. C is the one that does work. Park, the name of the object. Is there a method called has playground? Yes, it's right here. Is it being passed no parameters? Yep, it's an empty parameters. And does it return a Boolean? Here it returns a Boolean, and this one is a Boolean. So that's why C is correct. D is not correct because park, the name of the object, that's fine. Get acres, that's the name of the method, that is perfectly fine. What's bad is that this one is being passed a parameter, whereas the method as written does not have any parameters. So that's not good. And then E, you just can't do something like this. You can't say park.hasPlayground. I don't even know where to start with that one. You just can't do that. So the answer is C. All right, moving quickly because we've got 15 minutes left. Again, watch the recording, do a pause, try to answer these questions, and then listen to what my tips are. So here's question number 12. It's from page 31. Here I have an array, initializing it with an initializer list, going through a loop. Here I'm talking about 2 elements of my array, making a comparison. And when that comparison is true, I'm going to print. The answer for that is C. So my suggestion is when you have an array, draw an array on your piece of paper, on your, you have that booklet, you have plenty of room. Draw an array, put the numbers in the right spots, and see, trace the code, see how this is working. Keep in mind that whenever you refer to an array, here this is n minus 1, they're talking about adjacent items, as well as n and n plus 1 right here, they're adjacent items. So it's really asking, are the elements in these two adjacent items, if you do the subtraction, are they less than or equal to these two adjacent items? If I do their subtraction, is that the case? And if it is, then print out that middle element. And so the answer is C. Moving on to 15, doing an array list question. So pause it, come back, and here's the answer. Again, you're going to have the quick reference. So this is an array list. These are the different methods that you need to be familiar with array lists. So make sure you know how they work. And that's what these are doing. I'm doing some add, set, remove. And so if you do this question, you see that the answer is A. So make sure you know how the array list methods work. Know the difference between the two different add methods. This add method has just one element or one parameter. This add method has two parameters, the index as well as the object. So make sure you know the difference between the two, which you can see here in this line as well as this line. This is an example of a 2D array question. Whoops, there's the answer. So if you didn't pause, sorry. So here is my suggestions, what I had said before with 2D array. Make sure you know all about the different traversals, the row major, column major traversal, the serpentine row, the serpentine column, as well as the diagonal. Inheritance. So this question, if you want to pause it. And so here, if you want to in your book, write the superclass and subclass so you know which one goes above and which one goes below. And the answer is C. So know that this one won't compile. I think I typed this wrong. This should be Saris. And then recursion. So if you want to pause it. And then the answer is D. So again, with recursion, recursion will only appear as a multiple choice question. It will not appear as a free response question. If you want to solve your free response question recursively, by all means, go ahead and do that, but it's not required. None of the solutions to 1, 2, 3, 4 require recursion. So the only recursion you need to know is for the multiple choice parts. All right, so 10 minutes left. I want to wish everyone good luck, see what questions you have. This particular QR code, if you want to scan it with your phone, it will give you access to, so in the book, there are free response, like those 2 free response questions that you saw in the diagnostic exam. The starter code is in there. So you as a student can open up that file and you can copy and paste it into your compiler, whether it's BlueJ, Eclipse, or JGrasp, or whatever you happen to have. You can take that code, put it into your compiler, put it into your environment, and you can actually just type your code. Like, what did you write down for part A? Just type it in. What did you write down for part B? Just type it in. So this QR code will lead you to resources that I have available in the book for you as a student, as well as for you as for teachers. So there's the QR code. Hopefully you've taken a picture of this or saved it. If not, you have the recording that you can come back to. So questions and answers. And then here again is the link to the bit.ly of this recording. So hopefully you will take advantage of the recording, you as a student, as well as your friends, as Bob had said earlier, and the teachers. So
yeah, and just another thing that just occurred to me, teachers out there or students taking other AP courses, this bit.ly will take you to not only the Computer Science A recording, but to other recordings and other subjects that we've done. I mean, computer science A is clearly the best and most important of them.
Of course.
But just out of curiosity, it is we will give you access to the other ones we've done as well. So Debbie, 2 questions. First is an easy one, and the second one I'm going to ask you to go back to that one we left.
Okay.
There's a question about, in terms of FRQs, will there be one on recursion?
No, I just said that a few moments ago.
Oh, okay.
The recursion will only appear as a multiple choice. But if a student wants to write a recursive solution to questions 1, 3, or 4, they absolutely can, but it's not expected.
Okay. And quick question on, someone's asking on this URL if it's an O, a letter O, or a 0. It's an O. I'm 95% sure. Anya, if you're on, if you could double check that for me before the end, but I'm sure it's an O and not a 0.
And if you have any questions for me, there's an email address that's in the book, 5 steps to a 5, apcsa@gmail.com. Feel free to ask me some questions if you'd like. Students, teachers.
It is an O.
Thank you, Anya. It's a no. And I'm going to ask you quickly, Antonio Torres is asking, can we go back to the question on Unit 3?
Mm-hmm.
He was asking, why were there no braces on the if statement 1?
Okay, they're not needed. Curly braces are only needed if you're doing more than one statement in your code. So for space reasons, I left them off, but you can absolutely put them. So here, I don't know if I can write, but here he's asking if you put a curly brace right here and yeah, I knew I couldn't do that. Curly braces here and here. You absolutely can do it, and that's a very good thing to do, get in the habit of doing, is to put the curly braces. But as I said, if there's only one statement that you're doing with your condition, then you don't need them. Likewise with loops, see here, this loop, there's only one statement. This was not necessary, but it makes it a cleaner code. Right here, here's an if statement. There's only one statement. There's curly braces, not necessary, but it makes it nicer to read. Whereas here with this while loop, I have multiple things that I'm doing. I'm doing a system.out.print, I'm doing an assignment, and I'm doing a conditional. These curly braces are necessary. So it's a good idea to put them there. So I apologize for not having them there, but you will see they might be missing. And if they're missing, it's because it's just one single statement. Good question.
Thanks, Debbie. Thank you, Antonio, for your question. I think I've covered all of them that were included in the Q&A and chat. So I don't know if you want to give it another minute, see if anyone else comes in with another.
Okay.
All right, I don't see any. So I guess we're good to close it out. Thank you, Debbie. This was terrific. Really good stuff in a short period of time.
Well, good luck, everyone. Good luck on the test.
Oh, all right. Just a thank you. Thank you. Thanks. And just a final shameless plug. Recommend these to your friends and colleagues. Let's get some eyeballs on these webinars. All right. Thank you for attending. Good luck. Thank you, Debbie, for presenting. And take care, everybody.